the opportunity to speak. New Jersey history is always a cool topic to talk about, especially if you live in the state. So I really appreciate the time, and thank all of you guys as well for being here, for giving up your in some ways giving up your night to come and kind of listen to some ghost stories and some folklore, and hopefully you guys really enjoy it. So first off, I guess I kind of just like to say that I'm used to being live in front of crowds, and I really like the kind of the back and forthness of it and having discussions and asking and answering questions. So it's a little bit weird and a little bit different to be in a Zoom format, but that's okay. We'll certainly make it work. Something I kind of want to start with in terms of the ghost stories and the folklore is to kind of pose some questions to you guys just to kind of think about and to chew on as we go through some of these ghost stories and this folklore. I want you guys to think about some stories that you either, love today or grew up really loving. It might have been a favorite book that you had, or a favorite movie, or a favorite TV show, or something like that. And what I want you guys to kind of ask yourself is what drew you, or what draws you to that story? Why did you love that story so much? Was it the characters? Was it the setting? Was it the way that the plot unfolded? Did you like that, the good guys won in the end and the bad guys lost? So just some themes I think that I kind of want you guys to think about as we go through some of these stories and when we talk about folklore in general. What we do see with folklore is that a lot of these stories are stories that were told and retold over thousands of years. Folklore has been around for a really, really long time, probably going back as far as oral tradition, long before that there was actual written language. And folklore played a really important part in emphasizing social norms and preserving cultural identity, and teaching lessons and morals. So they do have a big purpose to ultimately serve within society. Now, in terms of folklore, a lot of oral tradition kind of revolved around the concept of preserving history. Sometimes it was the history of the particular culture or the country. Sometimes it was the history of individual family members. Sometimes it was religion. Folklore, I think, has a big part to play in that it wasn't just necessarily entertainment. Similar to how movies and TVs and books are today. They certainly are entertaining, but they also have certain key elements in them that help reinforce our societal norms. A lot of stories typically have relatable heroes or heroines, and a lot of times the personal characteristics of those heroes and heroines are kind of the reason why they're emphasized so much. A lot of times they have characteristics of being particularly strong or brave or courageous. Sometimes they're really intelligent and cunning, and sometimes maybe they're very selfless and generous people. And the reason why our main characters are like that is because that is what our society values. Those are the characteristics that our society wants to kind of pass on to people and say, this is how you should act if you want to be a good person in society. And again, we see that with a lot of books and stories and movies today. And along that same vein, we also see villains. Villains typically embody the characteristics that we don't want people in society to have, be it greed or being really ruthless and power hungry and things of that nature. And typically by the end of the folklore story, similarly to the end of the book or the movie, usually it's the heroes and the heroines triumphing and being rewarded, and the villains being punished because of a lot of those traits that, again, society either wants you to have or doesn't want you to have. So yes, folklore definitely has a part to play in terms of entertainment, and that's probably why a lot of these stories have been passed down for so long and why they've remained so popular. But part of it too, like I said, is to reinforce those cultural norms of things that society really places a high value on. Another thing that folklore really did for a lot of people, going back to times of oral tradition, right up even till the present day, is that it helped preserve cultural identity. Now, again, we can trace the roots back of folklore stories thousands and thousands of years. In some instances, long before cultures kind of came into contact with one another. So when cultures did start to come into contact with one another, what we see is that stories and oral traditions kind of were passed among those different cultural groups. And sometimes the details of the different stories became meshed together, and brand new stories were created out of that. Sometimes, though, folklore had the part of kind of maintaining, in some ways, the original story, such that when two cultures came together and they meshed together, sometimes some of those those cultural roots of the original groups were lost. And folklore kind of had a way of preserving some of those cultural roots and those cultural norms. So that has a big part to play in history as well. And I think a very good example of that today in modern times would be Native Americans in the United States of America. I know it's very, very important to them right now to pass on their generational stories and their generational roots to the next generation, so that these stories don't die out and those cultural roots and norms don't die out, and the languages don't die out. So yes, certainly entertainment, but folklore had a really big part to play in the culture as well. Now, when it comes to ghost stories, what I think here is that ghost stories in some ways are almost a subset of those folklore stories in the first place. And to me, where ghost stories really start to get really interesting is when we look at the different ghost stories that come from all across the world. Many different cultures have ghost stories. In fact, historically, we can trace some of the earliest written forms of ghost stories back to Homer's Odyssey, and that's going back 900 BC. But we can even trace the roots of ghost stories back even before that, into, again, the oral tradition times. So what to me is interesting about that is when we look at the physical descriptions that ghosts are typically given within those stories all across the world. When you talk about and you look at these social interactions that the people ended up having with those ghosts, and the reason why a lot of people believe that ghosts still exist here on Earth, kind of transcends boundaries. Cultures that never had interaction with one another prior to this all share very similar characteristics in terms of their ghost stories, which is interesting. Somebody, I think, had asked in the comments section earlier, do I personally believe in ghosts? And for the interest of transparency, I'm going to say I am a skeptic. But what I will say for the skeptics in the room is to consider that. Why is it that cultures and societies who have never had contact with one another have such similar examples of what ghosts look like, of what experiences between ghosts and the living interacting with the people in the live world? Why is that the case? Why is there so much similarity between them? And for, like I said, the skeptics in the room, maybe consider for the next just a little bit suspending some of that disbelief, and maybe ghosts are real. So I hopefully you enjoy some of these stories, even if you are among the skeptics, and that's certainly okay if you remain skeptical at the end of this. Okay, so with kind of that background in mind, let's kind of get into some of the New Jersey ghost stories that I have on tap for you guys. I have 7 total tonight. Some of them vary in length, but I tried to pick stories that were kind of all over New Jersey geographically. And for those of you who are interested, before I get into the stories, Weird NJ has like every single ghost story and every single haunted place in New Jersey you could possibly imagine. I tried really hard to make this an original presentation, but Weird New Jersey basically has that market cornered. So if you're somebody who has visited that site already and you've read some of those stories, I apologize in advance if some of this is repetition for you. But anyway, first major story of the night is the Shades of Death Road up in Warren County. Now, the Shades of Death Road isn't actually called that. It's a bit of a dark humor name that kind of got attached to it. Going much further back in time, the real name of the road is Shades Road, and the reason why it was called that by the locals is because if you travel on the road today, it's a very, very windy road, and it's surrounded on both sides with very, very dense forests, such that basically no matter what time of the day you're on that road, it's always pretty shady because of the trees, hence the name Shades Road. Now, the reason why it kind of got this dark, nickname to it, really largely depends on whose version of the story you believe. Some people claim that going back into the early 1800s, that because this road was so heavily wooded and because it was so windy, that windiness of the road created a lot of blind turns. And that was ideal for robbers and bandits and thieves that would hang out in the woods along that road and use those blind turns to kind of, ambush people on the road and to be able to steal from them. Now, as the story goes, these thieves that used to attack the travelers on the road were pretty violent ones and oftentimes would leave their victims murdered, usually by slitting their throats. And it reached the point that a lot of the people living in the region of this road got tired of it. They had reached their limit and they decided to form a posse to hunt down these thieves. And after they killed them, they hung them from the trees all along the road, partially as a sign to the travelers that it was safe to use the road again, but also partially as a warning for any future bandits that might come around, that this is what happens to people who, commit crimes on our road. Other people believe that this road got its nickname from the mid to late 1800s, when a nasty bout of malaria kind of struck the region and killed dozens and dozens of people, and that's kind of how it earned its moniker. Others say that in the more recent times, one of the main reasons why it's referred to today as Shades of Death Road is because of how windy that road is and how it's led to many fatal car accidents over time. Now, for the people who have traveled on this road, what they have reported is a lot of strange things happening and going on. A lot of people have reported thick fog banks appearing seemingly out of nowhere on the middle of the road, such that it makes driving on the road very, very dangerous, especially at night because of the windiness of the road itself. Other people have reported to have had their car chased by what they describe as red orbs that chase their car very aggressively through the fog banks before mysteriously disappearing. Now, some people believe that those red orbs that have been chasing people's cars are the ghosts of the people who died in the region. And some people believe that these ghosts have a good purpose for it. That the ghosts are trying to slow people down by creating these thick fog banks, hoping that it's going to, force them to realize that they have to slow down in order to be safe. But some other people believe that these ghosts may have a more malevolent goal, that it is in fact the ghosts of the robbers who are chasing these cars in an effort to try to slow them down so that they can rob them. So it again, lots of different stories here kind of wrapped up in the Shades of Death Road. And in some ways, I think that's the beauty of ghost stories and folklore, is that there are so many different variations and differences in them. The next story that I have for you guys shifts a little bit further to the south from the Shades of Death Road, in what's referred to as the Devil's Tower in Alpine, New Jersey. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar where Alpine is, because I wasn't when I first heard the story, it's right across the river from Yonkers, New York. So it's not too far at all away from New York City. So this story begins with a man named Manuel Rionda. Now, as the legend goes, Rionda used to be a very large land estate owner down in the American South in the late 1800s, and decided one day to move up north to New Jersey with his wife, and constructed this very large and gorgeous house for them to live in. And one of the things he also constructed here was a very, very large tower as a dedication to his wife. Now, this tower was built very, very tall for the time period. And the reason why it was built so tall was to give his wife a beautiful view over the tree line so that she could see the city of New York from the top of the tower. Now, of course, she absolutely loved this. And Manuel was so enamored with this tower that he built a tunnel connecting their house to this tower so that they never had to go outside in the elements. If it was bad weather out, they could always go from the house to the tower with no problem. Now, on one particular night, Mrs. Rionda was up at the top of the tower and was, enjoying her view of the city of New York, and saw two people emerge from the woods. She could make out that it was a man and a woman, but she couldn't tell initially who it was. After a couple minutes of observing these people, she came to realize that it was in fact her husband, Manuel, who was with another woman and was kissing this woman. Now, as, as the legend of the story goes, his wife became instantly heartbroken by this. And not only was she devastated in sadness, but she was also devastated in rage and in anger. And in this fit of rage and anger, decided to throw herself off the top of the tower and commit suicide. Now, as the legend goes, some people believe that as she was throwing herself off the top of the tower, that she had sold her soul to the devil in exchange for being able to come back to this world as a ghost, to be able to haunt her husband for the rest of his days for his infidelity. In the weeks and months after her suicide, strange things began to be reported by a lot of the people who had been inside the tower. Many people reported to feel a sensation of being pushed from behind whenever they got close to the edge of the tower. Other people reported to have seen a very shadowy, dark figure that walked around the top of the tower in the middle of the night. While others, still further, said that they could hear blood-curdling screams that came from the tower. Sometimes those screams sounded like a woman, and sometimes those screams sounded more like some type of an animal or a beast. And that's what convinced many people that the devil was in this tower, along with Manuel's wife. These strange occurrences became so regular and so dangerous that Manuel decided that he needed to cut off the tower from the outside world. He decided to disconnect the elevator that went to the top of the tower. He closed off all the entrances to the tower itself, and he even filled in the tunnel that stretched between his house and the tower in an effort to prevent the evil spirits in the tower from getting inside his home. Many years later, after Manuel died of natural causes, the town of Alpine attempted to deconstruct the tower, but after several accidents that led to the deaths of some of the construction workers, the project was ultimately abandoned, and nobody's ever really tried to deconstruct the tower since. So people who have been to the tower today, and you can drive up to it today if you want to, still claim that from time to time you can see that shadowy figure at the top of the tower. Some people also claim that if you hang out at the bottom of the tower long enough, you can get a random scent of perfume in the air that seems to come from out of nowhere. And a lot of people believe that that is the perfume that Mrs. Rionda wore the night that she jumped off the tower. So another very interesting story there for New Jersey. This third story that I have for you guys shifts our focus a little bit to the west, to Lambertville specifically. The haunted high school of Lambertville traces its roots back to 1935. Now, in 1935, Lambertville High School, in November of 1935, Lambertville High School's football team was playing their big arch rivals, which was New Hope from Pennsylvania on the other side of the river. By all accounts, it was a very exciting football game. It was 21-21 at halftime. Everybody, the crowd was really into it. Everything was going really well. And then sometime in the third quarter, a tragic accident happened. One of the wide receivers for New Hope's football team caught a pass and started running for the end zone, and it was partially tackled. And because he was only partially tackled, that led to a large pileup of people on top of him. When that pile was finally dispersed, that's when it became crushingly evident, unfortunately, that that wide receiver died from a broken neck of being at the bottom of the pile. Years later, well, obviously the game was abandoned after that. The tragedy was awful. The communities of both sides were very, very upset and distraught about it. About 20 years or so later, around 1955 or so, Lambertville High School was relocated to a brand new high school building, which left the old building completely abandoned, in addition to the football field that was nearby. So as you can see in this picture on the slide here, that is still what the building looks like as of today. Nothing's really happened with it. But having a giant abandoned school building and an abandoned field right next door, of course, is going to attract a lot of teenagers to go to that building, to break inside, kind of to take a look around and see what they can find. But it also led to a lot of teenagers in the 1950s going to the football field to kind of drink beers and to party and hang out. On one particular night in 1955, five teenage boys went to the football field and were drinking some beers, and one of them got beer muscles and decided to tell the story of the football player that died on the field 20 years prior, and then stood up and challenged the ghost of this football player to a race across the field. Now, it's somewhere around this moment when these five teenagers realized that the field had become very foggy, really without them even realizing it. And within a few moments of that teenager challenging the ghost to a race, the teens claim that they heard a growling noise, a low growling noise coming from the opposite side of the field, and a dark figure all of a sudden start to charge at them. When that happened, obviously that's going to cause all five of them to panic and to start to run across the opposite side of the field. Three of the five managed to make it to the fence, and the other two seemed to have fallen behind. The three that made it over the fence ran home, locked themselves in their rooms, and were genuinely freaked out for the rest of the night. It wasn't until the next day that they heard the police were at the football field investigating the mysterious death of two individuals, two teenage boys that ended up being those two teenage boys that they were with the night before. What the police ultimately ruled was that these two deaths were accidental, that they believed the two boys, or at least assumed that the two boys got into a fight with one another and they both succumbed to their wounds, and that is what ultimately led to their deaths. People have reported other stories of being approached by a teenager close to that building to, entice people to come into the building to check something out, only to disappear moments later. But another interesting and somewhat dark story associated with Lambertville Haunted High School. Story number 4 I have for you guys is the proprietary house that's in Middlesex. And this one is steeped in a lot of historical fact, which makes it pretty cool in my opinion, because I'm a nerd. So the proprietary house here is an interesting place. And again, it's another site where today you can go and visit it. They give tours of the building, I believe, today. The proprietary house was originally built in 1964, and it was built to house the royal governors of New Jersey at the time period. Because remember, in the 1760s, New Jersey was still a colony of Great Britain. And wouldn't you know it, which just makes it even more historically interesting, the first royal governor to live inside this house was William Franklin. Now, that name hopefully sounds familiar to some of you because William Franklin was the son of Benjamin Franklin. And much to Benjamin Franklin's chagrin, his son remained a loyalist to Great Britain throughout the entire Revolutionary War, never switched sides, no matter how much Ben Franklin tried to fight him on the issue. His son never budged. His son remained loyal to Great Britain and was even arrested for it a short time after the war came to an end. Now, it wasn't just the governors that were staying inside this gigantic home during the war itself. Because the property in the house switched hands throughout the war periodically, both sides used it to house important figures like military leaders and dignitaries. But what they also used the cellar for was kind of like a holding cell or a prison for captured soldiers on both sides. Now, anybody who's ever been in like a wine cellar or a cellar period, you'll know that it gets pretty chilly down there. So I know personally, I would never want to be held down there for days or even weeks at a time. So as you can imagine, the prisoners who were held down in that cellar were not being held under the best of conditions. And as a result, many of them ended up dying because of it. Over the years, many other people have simply just died in and around the house for natural causes. In today's times, a lot of people have reported interactions with ghost or supernatural activity. A lot of people have claimed that if you look at the window in the kitchen that overlooks the backyard, that from time to time you'll see a woman in white kind of standing in that window, only to disappear a couple minutes later. Other people have reported, specifically in the dining room, that if you stand in the room long enough, and sometimes it works more so if you're alone, a lot of people have reported to have felt feeling grabbed by the back of their neck, almost somewhat violently. Um, Paranormal activity people and ghost hunters have gone to the proprietary house and said that they've gotten significant paranormal spikes in the area of the cellar, in the area of the kitchen, and in the area of the dining room as well. There are a lot of other ghost stories associated with the proprietary house, but I think the one that interests me the most, the one that I really, I think kind of makes the hair stand up on the back of my neck the most, is a story of more recent times, where a mailman in the mid 1900s, when the house kind of became a bit of a boarding house for a time, a mailman approached the front door and rang the bell, and the door was answered by a what he described as a 4-year-old boy. And he asked the boy if he knew where this particular person was staying in the house so he could deliver a package. The boy very calmly turned around and motioned for him to follow him up the stairs, and led him all the way up to the 3rd floor before turning around a corner and disappearing. And after the mailman couldn't find him, the mailman started to knock on various doors to try to see, whose child this was, and maybe, they're missing their 4-year-old. And that's when everybody kind of reached the conclusion that nobody in the house at the time had any children. So clearly that mailman was very freaked out by that encounter and that interaction, and something that he claims has kind of stuck with him up to, for the rest of his life. Story number 5 I have for you guys tonight is the Ghosts of Finn's Point. And this is really a story that's kind of centered around Fort Delaware down in what's present-day Pennsville in Salem County. Now, Fort Delaware was originally created to protect the Delaware River from any outside threats or invasions, and particularly to protect the city of Philadelphia, which is further, up the Delaware. However, during the Civil War, what this fort was used more than anything else was a prison to house Confederate soldiers. At its peak by the end of the war, we know that Fort Delaware here housed somewhere around 12,500 soldiers by the end of the war, total number. And of those 12,500, somewhere around 2,600 had died during their being held there. Very quickly, because of the high death toll of Fort Delaware, it very quickly started to grow the reputation of being the Andersonville of the North. Now, anybody in the chat room who is a big Civil War fan, you probably have already heard of Andersonville, but for those of you who haven't, Andersonville was a Confederate prison down south in Georgia during the Civil War that was used to house Union soldiers. And because of the absolutely awful conditions that those Union soldiers were held under, between starvation, exposure to the weather and the elements, lack of access to medicine of any kind, poor sanitation practices, somewhere around 13,000 Union soldiers died in Andersonville prison. So that's kind of why Fort Delaware develops this reputation of being the Andersonville of the North, since 2,600 Confederate soldiers died here due to their poor treatment. Most of those bodies were simply just disposed of in mass graves on the site. And many people who travel to Fort Delaware and that area today claim to be able to see the ghosts of the soldiers that seem to be kind of wandering around, almost like they're looking for a way home, a way to get back down south again. Paranormal, again, experts and ghost hunters have also been to this place of Fort Delaware, and have also registered very high paranormal activity spikes. So it's a big hotspot area if you're somebody who's really interested in checking out haunted sites. Now, what makes this story a little bit darker too, to add a little more, one more chapter to the story here. Back in 1997, serial killer Andrew Cunanan killed his 4th victim on the site. The poor victim, unfortunately, was one of the keepers of the cemetery, and Cunanan just happened to kill him and steal the guy's car so he could get away. So another, like I said, very dark chapter to add to the Ghosts of Finn's Point. I have two more quick ones for you guys here, and one of which is a very, very classic story. The Woman in White story is a ghost story that really transcends. You see it across every major society and civilization and culture, really across the entire world when it comes to ghost stories. This is like the all-time classic story of the White Woman. Now, there's clearly very different, variations of this story, but all of them again seem to always have this woman in white. So what's going on here? This Woman in White story for New Jersey comes from Newark. And as the story goes, a newlywed husband and wife were in their car driving home from their wedding in the middle of a rainstorm. And unfortunately, that rainstorm made the roads very slick, and their car ended up spinning off, out of control off the road and hitting a tree and killing them both. In the weeks and months afterward, people who've driven on the same road reported to see a mysterious woman in white on the side of the road that looks like she's looking for something. And many people believe that she's probably looking for her husband before she, crosses over. She wants to cross over with him. One of the more chilling stories to come out of the Woman in White story from Newark, is the story of two teenage girls in the 1970s. These two teenage girls were driving on the road late at night and saw a woman in white emerge from the trees on the side of the road. And like most normal people, they pulled over to see if the woman was okay and to see if she needed help. What happened is that this woman in white walked up to the driver's side window with a very expressionless look on her face and opened her mouth, as the teenagers described, as though she were screaming, but no sound was coming out. That was enough to genuinely terrify them. And the driver gunned the accelerator and shot about a half mile or so up the road before they finally stopped to kind of, recollect themselves and to talk about what had just happened. Ultimately, they agreed that they needed to call the police and to go back to this spot because it may very well genuinely be a woman who needs help. The girls returned to the exact spot with the police, and the police did a very extensive search of the area and reached the conclusion that there was no sign of human activity anywhere in that region of the road. Years after that incident, those girls, both of them, were interviewed by a newspaper and were asked to kind of, give some more details about what happened that night. And even years later, both of those teenage girls said that they firmly believe what they experienced really did happen, and that they were genuinely terrified, that it was the most terrifying experience of their entire lives. And they both swore that they would never drive at night on that road again. So the Woman in White story, as I said, is a very classic ghost story that virtually every place and virtually every culture has some version of. The last story I have for you guys tonight, of course, is like the rock star story of the ghost stories for New Jersey specifically. And for those of you who saw that I'm kind of rocking the New Jersey Devils colors, good for you guys. You guys get bonus points tonight, again, because I'm a huge nerd. So the Jersey Devil here, like most really great ghost stories, it definitely has its foundations in historical fact as well. So let's talk about the legend first, and then we can talk about some of the historical background of the legend. So, as the legend goes of the Jersey Devil, what was originally referred to as the Leeds Devil, traces its roots back to the colonial times in America, to this poor woman named Jane Leeds. Poor Jane Leeds and her husband, who lived in the real area of what is now present-day Leeds Point, down outside Atlantic City, had 12 children. And I can only imagine the exasperation and the exhaustion of having 12 children. So as you can imagine, when poor Jane Leeds realized that she had now become pregnant with their 13th child, and I don't know at what point you just say no to your husband permanently, but she chose not to. After she found out that she was pregnant with this 13th child, she very frustratingly cursed the sky and cursed the child that was now growing inside of her belly. Fast forward 9 months later, and what was a particularly violent storm that was hitting South Jersey that night, Jane Leeds went into labor. And what emerged from Jane Leeds was what people inside the room describe as a very grotesque creature that had the head of a goat. It had the leathery wings of a bat. It had cloven hooves and a spiked tail. Now, when this creature emerged, it seemed to kind of immediately panic, started to fly around the room haphazardly, kind of started attacking people before finally flying out the window and disappearing into the Pine Barrens. Over the coming days and weeks afterwards, the people of the town nearby organized themselves. They got their dogs, they got their guns, and they attempted to hunt this creature down in the woods. Some of the hunters claimed that they were able to track it for a few weeks, that they were following the carcasses of animals that had been brutally mauled by a creature that, was leaving marks that were just unnatural. And cloven hoof prints were all around the carcasses of the dead animals as well. And ever since then, from time to time, people have claimed to have had experiences with the Jersey Devil, either seeing it fly around at night, or hearing blood-curdling screeches from the woods that sound like no other animal that would exist in the Pine Barrens. Some people even claim to have seen it. But that is the legend of the Jersey Devil. Let's talk a little bit now about where that legend came from and where the historical fact starts to come into play. Well, going down to this area of what is present-day Leeds Point in South Jersey, real place, and there really was a Leeds family who had 9 children, not quite as bad as 13, but 9 children certainly would still keep your hands full. The Leeds family here, Daniel Leeds being the head of the household, were part of the Quaker group that lived down in that region at the time. And Daniel Leeds' main job here was to publish almanacs. It's what he did for a living. Now, at some point in Daniel's career, he started to grow a really keen interest in astrology and the occult and magic and things like that. Now, when I say astrology, don't get that mixed up with astronomy. Astronomy is the study of the stars. Astrology is more so the study of zodiac signs and planet positions and how planet positions can affect people's moods and stuff like that. That is astrology. And he became so interested in this stuff that he began putting some of this astrological information into his almanacs, to the point where it really started to upset a lot of the Quakers in the area. And after several warnings, because they were a socially conservative group, or at least a religiously conservative group, and didn't appreciate the astrology being added in there, eventually he was banished from the community. And as far as he was concerned, that's okay, because that simply just allowed him to continue pursuing his passion, now at least out in the open instead of behind closed doors. So he continued with the almanac and he continued to add astrology to it. And then eventually he passed on this business, this almanac publishing business, to his son, Titan. Now, Titan continued on with the family tradition of adding astrology to the almanac every published time that it came out. And supposedly at some point, this almanac began to rival Ben Franklin's almanac, or what it was known as the Poor Richard's almanac. And that supposedly Benjamin Franklin began to see Titan Leeds as a bit of a business rival in his early years. Now, because Titan added a lot of astrology to his almanac, mixed with the fact that Titan was a very open supporter of the British Crown throughout much of the colonial period, that led to Benjamin Franklin starting to kind of print some pretty nasty, supposed to be satirical, kind of political cartoons of Titan Leeds, describing him as the Leeds Devil. So that's kind of where the title of the Leeds Devil came from. Now, what about the description of the Jersey Devil itself? Where did that come from? Well, something else that Titan Leeds started to add to his almanac here over time was his family's crest. And part of the Leeds family crest here had a creature that was referred to as a wyvern. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with what a wyvern is, they are two-legged dragons that have wings and have barbed tails. So by kind of, adding that family crest to the almanac, it only gave Ben Franklin more ammunition. So if you listen to the description of the wyvern, it starts to sound pretty similar to what we know as the Jersey Devil today. Now, what's interesting about the actual name Jersey Devil is that actually wasn't coined until 1909 in a newspaper. Prior to that, it was always kind of known more so as the Leeds Devil than anything else. Over time, the Leeds Devil legend kind of grew from being a satirical attack on somebody's business rival to kind of a boogeyman story that a lot of parents told their children when they were misbehaving. If you keep it up, if you don't go to bed like I told you to, the Leeds Devil is going to come and it's going to come get you in the middle of the night. And like I said, it really isn't until 1909 that the actual name Jersey Devil gets kind of applied, and it's been that way ever since. So those are my 7 ghost stories for you guys on the night. I hope you enjoyed them. And just a real quick, for those of you who are interested in doing additional research, particularly on the Jersey Devil, Brian Regal at Kean University, it really has done a lot of research and studying into this, and is a great person to reach out to if you have additional questions.
We also had some questions in the chat.
Oh,
we had a question related to the woman in white story.
Okay.
They wanted to know where that road was in Newark. Someone said Branchbrook Park.
It could be. I don't know the exact location, to be honest with you. I'm sorry. I wish I did.
Yeah.
So that person could be right, the person who answered in the chat room.
Awesome. And then we also had a question, is there any record of the 2 boys who died, either from the ghosts or a fight in Lambertville? Or is that just a rumor / folklore story and not literally true?
So great question. I actually tried to find that story in the newspapers going back to that particular time period. I couldn't find anything, but that doesn't mean that it didn't happen. It just means that I personally couldn't find anything.
Awesome. And let's see. And another question. Has the speaker visited any or all of the sites in his presentation? If yes, what were his experiences? Anything unusual?
Unfortunately, no. Oh, wait, I'm sorry, I lie. There we go, the Leeds house. So I actually drove all the way down to Leeds Point in order to take a picture of the actual house. I'm so glad you asked that question because I would have forgotten this slide. That is the actual Leeds house with which the legend is based off of. So that's it. That is the real Leeds house. It's still standing.
Did you feel any creepy?
I did not. I sat there. The only thing creepy, I think, was me because I was trying to slow down and take a picture of the house without looking too suspicious because apparently people still live in the house.
Oh, wow.
So I didn't want to be a weird, but but I wanted a picture. Unfortunately, no sightings of the Jersey Devil there, unfortunately.
We got another question. Do you know of haunted hotels in New Jersey?
Again, so I personally don't, but I'm sure there are. If you check out weirdnj.com, they have this market beyond cornered. I think they have over 90 stories and locations that are supposed to be haunted in New Jersey. So I highly recommend hitting them up.
Definitely. And does anybody else have any questions? You can send it to us in the chat and then we'll relay it. So far, I was creeped out. I didn't know a lot of these things. The Jersey Devil, we did have Professor Regal on. I think
Oh,
we had him like 2 years ago, and he did
cool.
a presentation about his book. He has a
Oh,
book
nice.
about the Jersey Devil, and
Yeah.
very comprehensive. So,
Oh, absolutely. He's by far the expert on the topic,
oh
without
yeah,
doubt.
it was very creepy, but very good.
Hmm. Hmm.
A
And
lot of like, mhm,
go ahead.
a lot of like political nuance and like cultural nuance of the area that went into the creation of the devil. So it was
Absolutely.
very interesting.
Absolutely. Agreed.
I was
I mean,
gonna
what the story I gave you was the Cliff Notes version, in essence, of
Yeah, definitely,
research.
definitely.
Yeah.
I was gonna say,
And
Brian Regal also speaks with the New Jersey Humanities Group as
Mhm.
one of their uh, special speakers. So he definitely does a lot of presentations throughout the state.
Mhm. Awesome.
let's see. I don't see any more questions necessarily. Someone asked if we could have another talk on this subject. Hey, definitely in the future we could schedule something.
Yeah, certainly.
um, let's see. Someone's asking if we'll get a copy. We're recording tonight's session,
Mhm.
and we will hopefully we do have a YouTube channel that we're working out the kinks for, so hopefully we'll be able to post it there. No guarantees yet, but hopefully we'll be able to post it. If not, we'll hopefully have Professor Judge back again, and we can just have another presentation that way.
Sure, definitely.
Um, Someone asked, what about the Drover's Tavern? Drover's Tavern? I don't know that one.
I don't know that one either, unfortunately.
She says it's in Rahway.
Okay. Might have to add that one to my
Exactly.
presentation.
Maybe that
Yeah,
will be the focus of our next presentation.
it could be.
So if anyone has any questions, this is the last call.
Last call.
Let's see, what story was the most interesting for you to research?
Oh man. Like I said, I think the woman in white story with the teenage girls in the 1970s, I think that one really hit home in terms of its creepiness. There's a similar story. So I grew up in Pennsylvania, and even in my area, there's a very similar story of a woman in white who walks along a creek, not too far from where I grew up. I've never seen her, but again, it's just one of those interesting, ubiquitous stories. It seems to be everywhere, to pop up everywhere.
All right. I think, well, if no one else has any other questions, I think we're gonna call it a night.
Awesome.
I
Well,
I
thank you
just
guys again for having me. I really appreciate it. And thank you to everybody who came on tonight. I hope you guys enjoyed it.
Yes, and we want to thank you for coming out and dealing with technical issues or
Sure. Yeah,
just
no problem.
all of this technical virtual world. And I'm glad everyone came out tonight and participated actively in the chat. And it was such an engaging presentation. And we really want to thank you for, giving your time and being with us tonight.
Sure. Absolutely. I loved it. Great time.
Appreciate that. And
Yeah.
for everyone in the chat, just a reminder, you can always sign up for our summer reading club, weekly raffle prizes, grand prize prize at the end. We have a couple of other virtual programs coming up at the end of next week we have Jamie Novak. She's an author who does decluttering information. So that will be same time next week. And then we also have another virtual program at the end of this month about storytelling and how to tell your story. And then at the beginning of August, we're going to have one about genealogy and how to trace your family lineage in New Jersey. So
Very cool.
keep a look at our website, our social media, as far as like updates on, our opening and our summer reading program and just all things library. All right.
Awesome.
So I'm going to, I guess, end tonight's presentation.
Awesome. Thanks again, guys. Really appreciate it.
Thank you again.
Yeah.
Have a
See
good
ya.
night, everybody.
You too.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Let's see. I'm going to end.